Number 8. Paige Rice. What began as a joyride in Liverpool, England one day in 2022 ended in tragedy for 27-year-old Callum Miller and 22-year-old Paige Rice. The friends were driving recklessly in Miller's Audi, hitting speeds of nearly 100 miles per hour when the car smashed into a taxi in the Queensway Tunnel. Paige died from her injuries just hours after the collision, and Callum passed away 5 days later. The taxi driver survived with serious injuries after undergoing extensive emergency surgery and was too incapacitated to give a police statement in the days following the accident. According to police, Callum's car was seen speeding along at 98 miles per hour in a 30 miles per hour zone just moments before it crashed into two vehicles. The Audi then collided with traffic posts and hit the taxi head-on, causing it to fly backward. Police initially treated the crash as a potential criminal matter, but as it became increasingly clear that Callum most likely wasn't going to survive, law enforcement dropped the investigation. Had he survived, he would have likely faced a charge of death by dangerous driving. Even though Callum passed away, Paige's mother felt angry that an inquest failed to specifically blame him for the deadly accident. Number 7. Sports bar shooting. In a shocking and totally senseless act of violence that occurred just days before Christmas in 2022, gunfire broke out at a sports bar in Montgomery County, Maryland. According to police, 35-year-old Luis Samuel Rios Rodriguez and 39-year-old Abed Jonathan Maidens Lopez got into an argument with another person shortly before 3 p.m. at a bar and restaurant in Tacoma Park. Both men were kicked out of the establishment, but Rodriguez returned with a gun and began fighting with the person he'd been arguing with before. Then, at some point during the altercation, Rodriguez allegedly pulled a gun and shot the man he was fighting with. The victim was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, but thankfully they survived. Law enforcement recovered the gun at the scene and arrested Rodriguez and Maidens Lopez. Rodriguez faces charges of attempted first-degree murder, first-degree assault, second-degree assault, and the use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. Maidens Lopez was charged with conspiracy to all the aforementioned counts, and both cases appear to be ongoing. Number 6. Marnie Clayton. When 18-year-old Marnie Clayton failed to return home after leaving a nightclub in Windsor, England at 2 a.m. in early 2022, her family immediately began to panic. And less than an hour later, they reported her missing. They had good reason to worry. Marnie had recently gotten out of a toxic relationship with 22-year-old Abid Khan, whom her loved ones described as controlling and abusive. Police had previously told Khan to stay away from Marnie, and now they feared that he'd abducted her. The young woman's disappearance sparked an urgent search that captured the attention of true crime sleuths as far away as Australia. But much to everyone's relief, Marnie was found alive 2 days after she disappeared. She wasn't exactly okay, though. She was with Khan more than 60 miles from where she'd vanished, and she accused her ex of taking her against her will. Marnie claimed that Khan had subjected her to a brutal campaign of physical abuse while holding her captive during those harrowing 48 hours. At some point, Marnie managed to use Khan's phone to send her mother a coded message indicating that she was in urgent need of help. Authorities charged Khan with false imprisonment, making threats to kill, battery, assault resulting in bodily harm, and violating bail. And during his trial, the court heard about how Marnie was out celebrating her birthday when Khan approached her and followed her into the women's restroom. Khan demanded Marnie's new phone number, which she changed in an effort to get away from him, but she gave it to him because she was scared. They then got a taxi together, and Khan talked Marnie into going to a hotel with him. However, what began as a consensual encounter soon turned violent. Help finally came, though, when police pulled over a vehicle that the pair were riding in together. In the end, Khan pleaded guilty to putting a person in fear of violence by harassment and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, half of which he's required to serve behind bars before becoming eligible for parole. He's also banned from contacting or going near Marnie, and hopefully this time he'll obey the order. In the meantime, Marnie continues to suffer from flashbacks and depression resulting from the torment she endured. Number 5. Felicia Johnson. In April 2022, 24-year-old Felicia Johnson traveled from her hometown of San Diego to Houston, Texas. Vacations are meant to be all about having fun, but like many people, she couldn't abandon working completely during her travels. To keep up with bills and expenses, and presumably to continue funding her lifestyle, Felicia auditioned for work at a gentleman's club and advertised her services as an escort. But after not hearing from her for an unusual length of time, her father reported her missing. Felicia was last seen leaving a hotel during the early morning hours in an Uber ordered by a 27-year-old man named Chukwuebuka Nwabodo. Then shortly after her disappearance, her bloodied phone and purse turned up in a local park. Further investigation revealed that Nwabodo had agreed to pay Felicia $500 for an intimate encounter at his residence. And while searching his computer, detectives found some disturbing Google searches for things like "What does bleach do to blood?", "Most forested part of Houston?", "How to delete your history completely?", and "How to get away with murder." Nwabodo had also recently purchased a saw, trash bags, towels, and a flashlight, and Felicia's blood was found in his apartment and car, along with latex gloves, a kitchen knife, and a shovel. Investigators also found photos of what looked like a mutilated woman and 3 other bodies on Nwabodo's phone. They arrested him in connection with Felicia's disappearance, but didn't have enough evidence to hold him at the time, so he was released. Unfortunately for detectives, though, he went on the run. In early 2023, Felicia's dismembered remains were found in the Sam Houston National Forest. Authorities have formally charged Nwabodo with murder and tampering with physical evidence, but he remains on the run as he continues to evade law enforcement. Houston police are hoping that someone with knowledge of his whereabouts will contact them and help bring the fleeing fugitive to justice. Number 4. Randall Collins. 24-year-old Randall Collins disappeared during a night out clubbing in Richmond, Virginia in April 2014, but there are varying accounts of what he was last seen doing. Some said he was seen leaving the club, while others claimed he was just standing outside of it. And at least one other report stated that Randall was seen getting into a car with several other men. Randall's father, Rannie Williams, has fought to keep his son's case in the news in hopes that someone who knows something will come forward with important information that could help lead to answers. During a 2022 interview with CBS 6 crime insider John Burkett and the Reopen the Case Foundation, Rannie told reporters that his son underwent some major changes in the time leading up to his disappearance. He said that Randall quit drinking and had accepted God into his life. Needless to say, it came as a shock when the family learned that Randall had gone out clubbing on the night that he was last seen. It was simply out of character for him to go out without letting someone in his family know. Rannie's belief that Randall was met with foul play was solidified when his son missed several funerals following the deaths of family members, including his mother and grandmother. He would have never voluntarily skipped out on the funerals, according to Rannie, who's been waiting for answers for nearly a decade. Investigators have found no evidence of foul play, but it also hasn't necessarily been ruled out. It's also possible that Randall had a seizure or became disoriented, as he already suffered from seizures and alcohol is known to trigger them. Number 3. Jassy Correia. In early 2019, Jassy Correia celebrated her 23rd birthday with friends at a nightclub in Boston's Theater District. During the early morning hours, though, she got into an argument with her friends and split from the group. She went outside and was apparently unable to get an Uber home, at which point a man approached her and offered her a ride. Jassy then got into the stranger's red Buick sedan and was never seen alive again. Investigators identified the mystery man as 32-year-old Louis D. Coleman III of Providence, Rhode Island. Surveillance footage from 2 hours after Jassy was seen leaving the club showed Coleman dragging a woman into his apartment. Further investigation revealed that he'd recently bought duct tape, surgical gloves, bleach, and other cleaning supplies at a Walmart store in Providence. But by the time law enforcement searched Coleman's apartment, he'd gone on the run. 5 days after Jassy vanished, an officer pulled Coleman over along Interstate 95 in Delaware. He apparently knew why he was being pulled over and told the officer, "She's in the trunk." Jassy's body was found crammed into a suitcase. She'd been strangled and bludgeoned to death, and her remains were covered in Coleman's DNA. The evidence was consistent with a brutal attack and showed that the young woman had fought desperately for her life. She'd also caused visible injuries to Coleman's face. Federal authorities charged Coleman with 1 count of kidnapping, resulting in death. A jury then found him guilty following his trial in 2022, and he was automatically sentenced to life in prison without parole after prosecutors opted not to seek the death penalty. Number 2. Jeffrey Joseph Leon. Also known by his stage name Jazzy Jeff Leon, 53-year-old Jeffrey Joseph Leon was a popular DJ in Louisiana's Acadiana region, but he vanished in August 2023 after attending a Zydeco concert in Baton Rouge. According to investigators, Leon was last seen near the concert venue at 2:30 a.m. as he left in his SUV. He called his family from a gas station to let them know he was on his way home and would be there soon. However, nobody heard from him after that. Leon's disappearance made no sense to his wife, Latasha Leon, or his other relatives, who became even more worried when he failed to show up for a DJing gig later that day. It was completely out of character for Leon to miss a gig, especially without notifying anyone. And as the family began to fear that foul play was involved, Latasha pleaded with the public for answers regarding her missing husband's whereabouts. In the meantime, police put out an alert to the public and to neighboring law enforcement agencies to keep an eye out for Leon's tan 2008 Ford Expedition, which had distinctive chrome rims. Answers finally came 2 days later, but to Leon's family, the wait felt like a lifetime, and they were devastated to learn that he'd been in a car accident. According to law enforcement, detectives painstakingly combed the corridor along the highway where Leon was believed to have disappeared. They eventually happened upon footage of Leon at a gas station, presumably the one he called his family from, and began to search the area nearby. Throughout the course of the search, police located Leon's SUV along the highway. It appeared as though he'd been in a single vehicle crash while driving home. At the time of the discovery, authorities didn't suspect foul play, but instead believed that Leon had succumbed to an unfortunate tragedy. They announced that toxicology and further testing would be performed to determine his cause of death. Number 1. Laura Garza. 25-year-old Laura Garza moved from Texas to New York City in 2008 with dreams of making it big as a professional dancer. Her future was cut short just 5 months later, though, when she vanished after leaving a Manhattan nightclub. One can only imagine how Garza's family felt after investigators discovered that she'd been seen leaving the club with a 24-year-old man named Michael Melee, who had a troubling history of attacking women. The young woman's wristwatch was found near the club, but other than that, there was little evidence to suggest where she might have gone or what had happened to her. Finally, in April 2010, nearly a year and a half after Laura vanished, some ATV riders found her remains in a rural wooded area near Mount Cobb, Pennsylvania, roughly an hour's drive from where Melee lived. At the time, Melee was in prison for violating parole in an unrelated case. Following the discovery of Laura's remains, though, he was charged with murder, manslaughter, and evidence tampering. Melee cut a deal with prosecutors and pleaded guilty to manslaughter and tampering with evidence, and as part of the agreement, he was required to provide a detailed explanation of what happened. He claimed that he met Laura at the nightclub and drove her to his home in Wallkill, Pennsylvania. Then, according to Melee's version of events, Laura noticed some things in his apartment that clearly belonged to another woman and got upset. She told Melee she wanted to leave, but he didn't feel like driving all the way back to Manhattan. Melee then claimed that he put his hand over Laura's nose and mouth to quiet her down as she yelled, and that he realized something terrible had happened only after she went limp. But instead of calling for help, he supposedly panicked and put Laura's body in a laundry basket, which he carried out to his car. He drove to the site where Laura's remains were eventually found and dumped her body there. Melee was sentenced to 23 years in prison, not nearly long enough according to her family, who said that they had absolutely no room for forgiveness in their hearts. At his sentencing, Melee apologized for what happened, and the judge stepped in and corrected him, stating, "Not for what happened, but for what you did." According to records, he could see freedom again as early as 2031.
9. Fatal fireworks. In a horrific accident that was caught on camera, a Brazilian mother of 2 was struck and killed by a firework during a 2022 New Year's Eve celebration in Sao Paulo. 38-year-old Elisangela Tinem was enjoying the night's festivities at Praia Grande with her family when a rocket suddenly malfunctioned and flew sideways instead of straight up into the sky. Disturbing footage of the incident showed Tinem's 2 young sons looking in horror as the rocket pierced through their mother's chest. The victim's cousin, 41-year-old Alexander Goncalves, tried taking the wayward projectile out of Tinem's body, but he was badly burned in the process. Goncalves told news outlet G1 that the family was relaxing at their vacation rental home when they decided to go to the beach and see the city's fireworks show. They noticed that some partygoers were setting off fireworks at the beach, so they did their best to keep a safe distance. Surprisingly, authorities classified Tinem's death as a homicide. According to an update on the case from February, an 18-year-old suspect named Christian Luan dos Santos Oliveira has been arrested and indicted for murder. He allegedly confessed to the crime, and the case is still ongoing. 8. Kidnapping prank terrifies neighborhood. There are countless ways of celebrating a wedding, and in 2023, a small group of Italian men decided to drift away from the standard booze and stripper bachelor party to congratulate their soon-to-be married friend. Armed with pellet guns and dressed in all-black helmets, balaclavas, and clothing with insignia reminiscent of ISIS terrorist groups, 9 friends descended on the groom's home in the small town of Trofarello and kidnapped him in the middle of the night. The groom was completely oblivious to the prank. He must have been terrified as the masked intruders gagged his mouth, forced him into the back of a van, and quickly sped off. They didn't get very far though. Apparently, the disguises were so convincing that locals believed the men were actual ISIS terrorists. One elderly witness was reportedly so terrified while watching the abduction from his window that he fainted from fright. Calls immediately flooded into the emergency hotline, and police wasted no time descending on the town, where they set up multiple checkpoints and launched a massive manhunt for the kidnappers. Officers discovered the van outside one of the men's houses. The groom was inside the car and still had no idea he was being pranked. He was probably relieved to learn that it was all just an elaborate joke, and the fun ended right then and there for his friends, who were charged with triggering a public panic. 7. Baltimore block party shooting. 2 people were killed and 28 others were injured in July 2023 when gunshots broke out at an annual block party in Baltimore, Maryland. According to court documents, the shooting started when a young teenager pulled a gun out and began firing toward a group of partygoers. At least 2 other men also shot at people during the chaos. The party was already getting out of hand hours before the shooting took place. As the crowd of attendees steadily grew into the hundreds, nearby residents called 911 and reported that some individuals were armed with guns and knives. Unfortunately, the police response came only after bullets were fired. Citing a breakdown in communication, law enforcement has promised to review the incident in order to determine why they didn't respond to the scene faster. One of the suspects, 18-year-old Tristan Brian Jackson, was wearing an ankle monitor in connection to an unrelated previous case during the shooting. Data from the device showed that he was attending the party in the time leading up to the crime. Jackson was also allegedly captured on surveillance footage, firing 5 rounds at a group of people who were trying to run away. He now faces dozens of charges, including 7 counts of attempted first-degree murder. One other teenager has been charged with multiple gun-related counts, but no other suspects have been arrested. As of the latest update, nobody's been charged in connection to the 2 deaths that were reported. 6. Barbie party leads to broken bones. While at her friend's Barbie-themed 30th birthday party in 2023, a radio star named Laurent Phillips experienced a freak accident that left her in such bad shape that the doctor who treated her thought she was run over by a car. Dressed as hip-hop Barbie, she went to the party in Melbourne in honor of her fellow presenter Jessica Roberts. The event was attended by the many who's who of the region, including several socialites who were all dressed as different well-known Barbies in accordance with the party's theme. Phillips decided to leave around midnight that night. She planned to sneak out of the party because she knew she would end up staying a lot longer if she tried saying goodbye to everyone. In a hurried attempt to rush out and find her Uber, she tripped in her large platform shoes and took a rough spill, landing in front of the waiting car. The young woman's hand immediately started to swell up and she was in extreme pain, but she turned down her fiancé's suggestion to visit the emergency room since she felt silly with the idea of them showing up dressed as Barbie and Ken. After getting home later that evening, Phillips decided to ice her injury and go to bed. When she woke up the next morning, the injured palm was completely blue. At that point, there was no denying that she needed to see a doctor, so she sucked it up and went. X-ray and CT scans revealed that her hand had been broken in 4 different places. Her hand was so swollen the doctors only narrowly avoided having to cut off her engagement ring, and she was told that her arm looked like it had been run over by a car. According to a recent update, she may end up needing surgery to repair the damage done to her hand. But Phillips seems to be in good spirits despite everything, and she even jokingly referred to herself as Trauma Barbie. 5. Surfers vanish in rough seas. In 2023, to celebrate his 30th birthday, Elliot Foote traveled all the way from Australia to Indonesia with 3 friends for some fun in the sun. During the trip, the group left Sumatra on a 30-foot-long wooden boat and headed to Penang Island, a vacation hotspot known for its incredible surfing waves. The vessel hit bad weather, including heavy rain, and disappeared along with the 4 Australian vacationers and 3 crew members. A large-scale search was launched, and the missing men's family and friends started to fear the worst as hours passed with no signs of their loved ones. Finally, after over 38 hours lost at sea, the crew of a boat involved in the search spotted the 4 surfers bobbing on their surfboards in the ocean, along with 2 of the 3 missing crew members. It's unclear what happened to their boat, and the 3rd crew member has still not been found, but the survivors were all in pretty good condition for having been out at sea for over a day and a half. Elliot and his friends took a much-needed rest after their rescue, and then went on to enjoying the remaining 8 days of their trip. 4. Mysterious Mirage deaths. During the summer of 2023, 2 men turned up dead after vanishing from the Brooklyn Mirage nightclub in New York City, and at least 1 other man was kidnapped. At 9:00 p.m. on June 11th, a 27-year-old psychologist named Carl Clement was denied entry into the club because security thought he was already intoxicated. He left with plans to visit a nearby gas station and was discovered dead in nearby Newtown Creek just 5 days later. On July 21st, a 32-year-old eye surgeon named Michael Bautista was kidnapped from the Mirage after jumping into a cab with a fellow passenger who was later identified as 43-year-old Anthony Tony G's Benjamin. The suspect apparently claimed to be a promoter for the club, and the men went to an after-party in Manhattan together. After the party, they took a cab back to the doctor's car, which was parked a few blocks from the Mirage Club. Benjamin then allegedly kidnapped the doctor at gunpoint and forced him to drive to the Bronx while bragging about how he's put people in body bags before. The suspect has also been accused of forcing the victim to take out money from an ATM. With the cash, Benjamin then went on a $6,000 spending spree at a Foot Locker store, a barbershop, and even a strip club. The doctor finally escaped after convincing his captor that he was being called in to work for an emergency surgery. He reported the kidnapping shortly after arriving at the hospital. On July 29th, 8 days after the doctor was kidnapped, a 27-year-old Goldman Sachs senior analyst named John Castick also disappeared after leaving the Mirage around 2:30 a.m. one night. He told his friends that he planned to take an Uber back to his Manhattan apartment but never got home. Benjamin and an alleged co-conspirator were released not long after without bail on charges of second-degree kidnapping with a firearm. Castig's body was located shirtless and floating in Newtown Creek, less than a half-mile from where he initially went missing. It was the same creek where Clement's body had been found just a few weeks earlier. Authorities have not yet identified the causes of death in either Castig or Clement's cases, and the 3 suspicious incidents involving Mirage concert goers remain shrouded in mystery. 3. After-prom party turns deadly. An after-prom house party near Godley, Texas took a deadly turn for the worse when a fight broke out between 20-year-old Jardin Moblin and 19-year-old Spencer Gilbert. Moblin was shot in the head during the struggle and was immediately rushed to the hospital while clinging to life. He was put on life support, but doctors already knew he wouldn't make it. The young man's mum, Janelle Province, made the difficult decision to donate her son's organs and said her last goodbyes. She later told Fox 4 News that Moblin attended the party with his girlfriend, who was still a high school senior, and that the couple were excited about the event. Meanwhile, Gilbert allegedly drove hundreds of miles to Houston with another suspect. While there, he led police on a high-speed chase. Initial news reports identified the second suspect as a witness who was kidnapped at gunpoint, but authorities later claimed this was not the case. The nature of the second person's involvement in the situation is still unclear. Gilbert fled on foot after losing control of his vehicle and crashing into a building. He was captured after a brief foot chase. He now faces charges in Houston for evading arrest, aggravated kidnapping, and being a felon in possession of a weapon. He was extradited to Johnson County, where he faces a slew of charges including murder, aggravated assault causing serious bodily injury, evading arrest, and more. 2. Bizarre disappearance comes to equally strange end. Jonas Bear and his on-and-off girlfriend, 37-year-old Cynthia Hovspian, went missing in August 2023 during what was supposed to be a short relaxing hike in Fairbanks, Alaska. The couple were visiting the state from Tennessee to celebrate Bear's 50th birthday when they failed to check out of their Airbnb. They were reported missing after their luggage was discovered still in their room. Their rented Jeep was located abandoned outside a resort about an hour's drive south of Fairbanks. A relative of the victims told the New York Post that he suspected the two became disorientated and lost their way during the 20 hours of daylight that the region typically experiences during that time of year. Others described the relationship between Jonas and Cynthia, saying a lot of controversy and weirdness was involved. After struggling to overcome a drug addiction and suffering multiple strokes, Cynthia had fragile physical health. In addition to sometimes needing a cane, she was visually impaired, causing her stepmother to wonder why Bear took her on a hike to begin with. There were also several strange videos on Cynthia's YouTube channels accusing Bear of abuse in the past. Even more strange, Bear left his cell phone behind in Tennessee during the trip to Alaska. 8 days after the couple went missing, a hiker spotted them along a trail less than 2 miles from where they were last seen. A photo taken shortly after the couple's rescue showed Bear covered by dirt. In an interview with local radio station KUAC, Bear said that they got lost while following a trail into a burn area, where they were unable to distinguish between the burn marks on the ground and the actual trail. They quickly became disoriented and only got more lost as they tried finding their way back. The couple survived on what little food they had but suffered from thirst. At times, they saw search aircraft hovering over a nearby area but were too far away to catch its attention. After trying and failing to find their way out of the woods for over a week, Cynthia was becoming too weak to keep hiking and they were both starting to suffer from hypothermia. Luckily, Bear found the trail and some hikers just a few hours later and guided rescue personnel back to Cynthia. Luckily, neither of the two suffered from any life-threatening injuries. 1. Harrowing holiday abduction. An 18-year-old woman was enjoying the 4th of July fireworks display in Walla Walla, Washington in 2023 when a man forced her to get into a car at gunpoint and sped off. Witnesses reported the crime at 10:30 p.m. and the young woman's relatives helped police locate her through the Find My iPhone app, which enabled them to pinpoint the victim's exact location. After arriving at the scene, law enforcement discovered the woman screaming for help through a basement window in an obvious state of distress. Officers broke into the glass and protected the woman until another team got there and made their way through the property to rescue her. The suspect, 18-year-old Jazzy Jeff, had already fled the scene by that point. Officers were unable to find him during a search, but he ultimately decided to turn himself in at the police station. He now remains behind bars on $50,000 bail, while facing 2 felony assault charges and 1 felony kidnapping charge.
Number 8. Arianica Primer. 27-year-old Arianica Primer tragically lost her life on her birthday, September 10, 2020, in a shooting incident at Kiss nightclub in Milwaukee. Arianica's older sister, Siobhan Oliphant, expressed the profound grief of the family, lamenting that her sister should never have died on her special day. The fatal incident began with an argument inside the nightclub, leading Arianica to step outside, where she was shot and died on the spot, never even making it to the hospital. Arianica's family, particularly her 2 sons, was left devastated by her untimely passing, but they remember her as an intelligent woman and a devoted mother. Siobhan Oliphant, who grew even closer to Arianica after their mother's absence during their childhood, highlighted the strong bond they shared. Arianica was always there for her, rearranging her schedule and making sacrifices to support her sister. Now, though, the family is left grappling with a painful void. The tragedy has prompted the family to reflect on the violence in Milwaukee, urging the community to cherish life and denounce such senseless acts. The Milwaukee police arrested a 36-year-old man in connection with the case, and it was set to be reviewed by the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office. However, it's now 2023, and there's been no additional media coverage on this story. Arianica Primer's untimely death serves as a heartbreaking reminder of the need to address senseless violence. Number 7. Brandi Wells. 23-year-old Brandi Wells looked forward to returning to college after putting her education on hold to focus on her marriage. The marriage didn't work out though, so in 2006 she enrolled in classes at a college in East Texas. Before returning to the classroom, she wanted to squeeze in a night of fun. On the evening of August 2nd, Brandi stopped at her mother's house in the city of Tyler, where she got all dressed up before heading to a nightclub in Longview. But she never made it home, and her Pontiac Grand Prix was found abandoned several days later on the side of rural Interstate 20. There were no signs of foul play, and no sign of Brandi. Her cell phone wasn't in the car, but her purse was. There was also a gas can in the trunk, which Brandi's relatives found odd, since it wasn't typical for her to be prepared for emergencies. Footage from the nightclub showed Brandi arriving alone at around 10:45 p.m. and leaving alone about 2 hours later. She appeared to be acting normal and didn't seem to be in any sort of distress. A man who met her at the club told police that Brandi had said she needed gas money, causing detectives to wonder if she'd asked anyone else for help that night. The fellow clubgoer, however, was ruled out as a suspect. Several days after Brandi's car was found, her cell phone was discovered in another location. Investigators identified a person connected to the phone and questioned the individual, but while they are unable to rule him out as a person of interest, they also don't have enough information to definitively say whether he was involved in Brandi's disappearance or not. And now, more than 17 years later, the case remains cold. Number 6. Amy St. Laurent. 25-year-old Amy St. Laurent vanished in October 2001 after a night out dancing in Portland, Maine's Old Port neighborhood. She'd recently gotten out of a long-term relationship and was enjoying her newfound freedom while focusing on her career at an aerospace manufacturer. Amy was spending the evening with a friend from Florida named Eric, but he wasn't much of a dancer, and she seemed to be hitting it off with 2 other men who were at the club. Eric told police that he went to use the restroom at the club, and when he came out, Amy and the 2 men were gone. He claimed that he went outside and even walked around the block, but couldn't find the trio. Assuming that Amy had voluntarily run off with the other customers, Eric drove back to her apartment where he was staying. But when he awoke the next morning, there was still no sign of Amy. Not knowing what else to do, and still under the impression that Amy had ditched him, He wrote her a note and left. After clearing Eric of any involvement in Amy's disappearance, investigators determined that Amy had been invited to an after-party by a 21-year-old man named Jeffrey Russ Gorman, who had an extensive criminal history. He also had a troubling record of allegations from women who believed they'd been drugged and assaulted by him, many of whom had initially felt too ashamed to come forward. Gorman told police that he drove Amy home at 2 a.m. after nobody besides his roommate showed up to the party. But Gorman's roommate told police that he came home to an empty apartment at 3 a.m. and that he woke up 2 hours later to find Gorman cleaning the bathroom. 2 months after Amy disappeared, her remains were found in a shallow grave in a wooded area near the home of Gorman's mother. She'd been shot in the head, and Gorman's mother admitted to police that her son had confessed to the crime. According to the version of events given to the police, Amy had said something that angered Gorman, and he reacted with deadly violence. Gorman was captured in Alabama after an armed standoff with law enforcement, and in the end, he was convicted of Amy's murder and was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Number 5. Richard Petrone and Danielle Imbo. Philadelphia natives Richard Petrone and Danielle Imbo met in their teens but fell out of touch with each other until 2005, when they reconnected in their mid-30s. At the time, Danielle was separated from her husband and had a young son. The future of her and Richard's relationship was uncertain, but they both seemed intent on enjoying each other's company as they tried to figure out if there was any long-term potential. So when Richard called Danielle up one day and invited her out for drinks and dinner with some friends, she eagerly took him up on the offer. Other members of their group would later recall that the pair appeared to be having a fun time throughout the evening. The couple called it a night at around 11:30 p.m. and were last seen leaving the bar. Richard planned to drive Danielle home, but neither of them made it back that night. In fact, they've been missing ever since, along with Richard's pickup truck. Both Danielle and Richard's families quickly knew that something was terribly wrong, because it was completely out of character for either of them to simply vanish into thin air without telling anyone where they were going or why. Their loved ones immediately kicked the search into high gear, hoping for a quick resolution. But more than 18 years later, they remain missing without answers. Toll camera footage revealed that Richard's truck hadn't traveled on any major bridges or roadways after leaving the bar. And while carjackings are common in Philly, the FBI found no evidence that it was likely to be the case. Based on the route the pair would have taken to reach Danielle's home, it also seems unlikely that Richard accidentally drove into the Delaware River. The friends that the pair were out with that night have all been eliminated as persons of interest, and Danielle's estranged husband was ruled out after proving that he had an airtight alibi, despite his history of harassing Richard and being possessive of Danielle. In 2014, nearly a decade after Richard and Danielle disappeared, authorities admitted that they suspected foul play and that the couple may have been killed at the hands of an organized crime group in a murder for hire. In other words, it could have been a mob hit. Investigators have also conceded that if this happens to be the case, they may never find the couple's remains or the person responsible. Number 4. Ben McDaniel. Cave diving is an unavoidably dangerous activity, but 30-year-old Ben McDaniel had a passion for it. While living at his parents' beach house in Florida in 2010, he drove to the Vortex Spring Diving Park near Ponce de Leon for a solo cave dive. 2 days later, though, employees at the park's dive shop noticed that Ben's truck had been sitting in the parking lot unattended. Ben was last seen by 2 park employees at the entrance of a submerged cave located at a depth of 58 feet below the water's surface. And since then, there's been no sign of him. Naturally, it was assumed that something went terribly wrong during Ben's dive, causing him to drown. Many believe that he ventured deep into a part of the cave system that's not normally accessed by divers, which would explain why no trace of his body has ever been found. But Ben wasn't a small guy, leading some to doubt that he somehow squeezed into one of the cave's narrow points of no return. Without a body, it's impossible to say for sure what happened to Ben. At the time of his disappearance, he was overcoming a lot of recent hurdles, including a divorce and a failed business, leading some to wonder if depression caused him to do the unthinkable. There are also theories that suggest Ben was murdered, but there's no solid evidence to indicate that this may have been the case. Ben's family has invested enormous financial resources into the search and investigation, but he remains missing more than 13 years later, leaving his loved ones without the closure they long for. Then, in 2013, he was legally declared dead. Number 3. Morgan Harrington. In October 2009, 20-year-old University of Virginia student Morgan Harrington attended a Metallica concert on campus in Charlottesville with 3 of her friends. She went to use the restroom during the show's opening performance and never returned. When her friends called her, she told them she'd been locked out of the show due to a no re-entry policy and that she'd find a new ride home. Aside from the disappointment of missing the concert, Morgan seemed fine, so her friends didn't worry about her. But Morgan never returned home at all, and at that point her loved ones knew she likely wasn't okay. 3 months later, Morgan's remains were found in a remote field about 10 miles from the concert venue. She had several rib, arm, and skull fractures, leading the medical examiner to conclude that she died from homicidal violence. And a t-shirt she was wearing on the night of her disappearance was discovered outside an apartment building just 1.5 miles away from where the concert was held. It wasn't until 5 years later that Morgan's murder was connected to the murder of another young woman named Hannah Graham. At the time, the main suspect in Graham's murder, Jesse Matthew Jr., was also facing allegations of brutally assaulting a young woman nearly a decade earlier. The hair on Morgan's t-shirt was also identified as belonging to Matthew's dog, adding the young woman's murder to the mounting list of charges against him. Matthew pleaded guilty to murdering Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham and received 4 consecutive life sentences. And as part of the plea agreement, he forfeited his right to appeal and won't be eligible for release due to age-related health issues. Number 2. Kortne Stouffer. For over a decade, a Pennsylvania family has been traumatized by the heartbreak of not knowing what happened to their missing loved one. While spending an evening out with friends in Harrisburg in July 2012, 21-year-old Kortne Stouffer got into an argument with someone at a bar. She ended up going home to the apartment that she shared with her boyfriend, who was on house arrest at the time as part of his probation for a criminal conviction. There was a party going on at the apartment, even though Kortne's boyfriend wasn't supposed to be around alcohol. Then, after receiving a noise complaint, police came and broke up the party and arrested Kortne's boyfriend for violating his probation. Believing her boyfriend could be facing a lengthy sentence behind bars, Kortne was extremely upset and angry about the arrest. So she and a friend confronted her downstairs neighbor, who they suspected of calling the cops, and at 3 a.m. the police were once again called to the scene, this time to break up the argument between Kortne and the neighbors. Officers left the building shortly before 4 a.m. after getting the parties to return to their apartments. But less than 25 minutes later, the police were called to the address for a 3rd time when the neighbor complained that Kortne was stomping on the floor above them. However, nobody answered when officers knocked on both Kortne's and the neighbor's door, so they left the scene. Kortne hasn't been seen or heard from ever since. A friend who stayed at Kortne's apartment that night claimed that he and Kortne were there when police came the 3rd time, but that they didn't hear officers knocking. The friend further stated that when he woke up the next day, Kortne was nowhere to be found, but all of her belongings had been left behind, including her wallet, cell phone, car, and dog. Authorities suspect foul play, despite no signs of violence or a struggle being found at the scene, but they continue to hope that someone with information will come forward and help solve the case. Number 1. Michael VanZant. On what began as a normal Saturday night in March 2016, 36-year-old Michael VanZant met up with friends in Hermosa Beach, California, with plans to watch a UFC fight and go bar hopping. And afterward, he planned to crash at a hotel room he'd rented at a nearby Quality Inn. After the fight was over, Mike's group decided to go to a bar called the American Junkie. They were waiting in line to get inside at around 10:15 p.m. when Mike stepped into a liquor shop next door. By the time he left, his friend group had split up and gone into different bars. Surveillance footage from the area showed that Mike spent several hours searching for his friends on foot, and in the meantime, his friends tried contacting him to let him know where they were. But Mike's phone was dead, and he was never able to reconnect with the group. Phone records later confirmed that members of the group had tried reaching him at least 20 times. And at certain points throughout the night, Mike was no more than 60 feet away from his friends, but they just kept missing each other. Mike eventually went back to the liquor store where he purchased an unknown item. He was last captured by a security camera as he walked through a parking lot toward the beach. He never returned to his hotel room or showed up at work the following Monday. There's been no sign of Mike ever since, leaving a big question on both his whereabouts and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance. Authorities haven't found any evidence of foul play, so they suspect that Mike may have accidentally drowned. But until or unless he's found, nobody will ever know for sure. If a close friend vanished during a night out and you later learned that they disappeared on purpose, would you be angry at them for the emotional turmoil caused by their absence? Or would you simply be relieved that they were okay? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.